Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Marketing Detective. This is our final episode of the season. And if my background looks a little different, I'm not in studio. I'm actually in my office here at Nexstar, and we'll be having a great conversation with a dear friend, a great author, and a wonderful mentor. That's our focus today on the Marketing Detective. Thank you for joining us for our last conversation of 2021 here on our podcast. And today I have a very special friend who has been an influence on my life. And by the way, has made me a lot of money personally in my career. But my friend, my mentor, Jim Doyle, is here with us today. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We are so excited to have you here. With the book coming out, you honored me with a copy of the book a few weeks before it came out, so I was one of the first to get to read it. I also have downloaded the audio version of the book so I could have it on the go when I was driving to make sure that I got all 5 hours in of the book.
Nobody should really have to do that.
Well, it was one of those things you could hardly put it down. There were so many things that were affirmation, and we're going to talk about that. But before we jump into that, my introduction to Jim Doyle was when I was working for Comcast Cable. My very first sales job, I'd come from the broadcast side, been a journalist, moved to what they say the dark side, to sales. And the first seminar that I went to when I started working with Comcast Cable Sales was a Jim Doyle conference here in Dallas. And I will say to anyone in this industry, if you ever have the privilege of that being the first time you get introduced to sales, that is the best introduction you can ever receive. And I have used the advice. Jim has worked with many of our television stations, many of my television stations for many, many years with Jim Doyle and Associates, which we'll talk about your retirement a little while ago. But Jim, kind of tell us, you've been doing this now for 50 years. Tell us, where did it all begin for you?
Well, I started actually in sales, selling television advertising. I was 21 years old, and I got hired by the NBC station in Portland, Maine. And like so many of the salespeople who would listen to this call or be part of this call, the account list I got was at that time the Yellow Pages and a handshake and wish me good luck, and off I went. So I probably wouldn't get hired today. I'd flunked out of college. I was not the high level candidate that I think they were looking for, but I was just so blessed to find this business. I don't know about you, Mitch, but I every day I just say thank you that I found this industry as opposed to all the other things you could have done, because I love it. I still love it.
Well, and Jim, you have seen so much evolution of our business. I know when we worked together originally, and this was, to date myself, 2002, guys, that if you're doing the math, it was a couple of years ago. We were talking about the conversion of newspaper, changing the ad sizes in newspaper, which, by the way, you were the greatest threat to newspapers around the country for newspaper ad sales, because you really helped educate both our automotive, our entertainment categories. But talk a little bit about some of that evolution and some of the things that you've seen, in your career, and how that's impacted our industry.
Well, it's so interesting because I think you're really at the cutting edge of that in the space that you occupy. But so I was part of we got rich in the television business, the cable and TV business, and radio to a certain extent, as we moved dealers out of the newspaper into electronic media. But what was that caused by? That was the sons and daughters of successful dealers coming into their dealerships taking over and saying, we're going to do this in a different way. Well, my view is you have the exact same thing happening now, which is the sons and daughters of those sons and daughters are coming in, and now they're moving more and more into a digital world. And it's almost a repeat of the exact same thing that happened 30 years ago, just done with a different media. I liked it as a TV guy. I liked it a little bit better the first time than I am now, because the challenge is to continue to educate these new younger dealers about the power of traditional media, especially when it's married with digital. That whole combination that Tom Ray calls prodigital. The marriage of traditional media and digital, which I think is the power combination. But
I saw a factoid in the 1980s. We've always been very distracted by messages all over the place, from television, print, radio, billboards, and so on. But the average person was inundated with about 400 messages in the 1980s. Now it's close to 1,500 to 2,000 a day between social media and all of these platforms. How are you continuing to be able to help companies rise above the clutter and actually make a difference in their advertising and marketing efforts?
Well, I think it's actually 1,507 messages, because I have the 7 calls each day I get about my car warranty. So you've got to add that to the mix too.
Oh, that's funny.
So, I think, and I love the title of your podcast, The Marketing Detective. I think one of the most important words in marketing is the word focus. So how do I break through the clutter? I think when businesses try to be all things to all people, they run the risk of becoming nothing to everyone. And so businesses finding their own niche, something that in the JDA company, we call a singular point of attack, not trying to be all things to all people, but really narrowing your focus. And I also think that that's equally true sometimes for media, that as I break through the noise by being more narrowly focused in the places I choose to place my media dollars, so that I can increase my frequency to get above the noise, because that's really the biggest issue. Fundamentally, businesses have a decision whether, and this is, by the way, in my view, a media agnostic decision, because it's whether digital or traditional media. My decision is, am I going to reach 1 million people once, or am I going to reach 10,000 people 100 times? It's going to cost you roughly the same amount of money to do that. But my view is that I'll always get more impact for the money I spend if I reach 10,000 people 10 times rather than reach 100,000 people once.
And of course, as we move from the traditional television, which has kind of been the magic number of 3, we're going into OTT, where they're having to see this 6 and 8 times. Exactly. Because it's more diluted. People are getting up and not necessarily being in front of the screen.
I never bought into the average number of 3 argument, because averages are unbelievably deceptive. I mean, that takes the person who's a heavy user of any product, and they've seen it 15 times, and they average it with most of us who only saw it once, and we call that an average of 3. One of my favorite lines is the statistics are like skimpy bathing suits. What they show you is interesting, but what they cover up is essential. And so that average frequency number can be a skimpy bathing suit.
Oh my goodness! So,
am I going to get censored for that? Are we in trouble?
No. This is no. I actually clicked that button on YouTube that says maybe inappropriate.
No, I don't think that one's going to. I don't think that'll make to the deal. So
it won't. So Jim, you retired last year. And most people, as I was reading in your bio, most people go play golf, and you go, I'm terrible at it.
I suck at golf.
So you decided to, in your time off, to continue to talk about what it means to work in this industry, and you turn to some of the people that have been so important and so instrumental in your life, both those that called on you had one of those, right, and those that was the Arbitron rep, just in case I was listening, but also those that you had worked with or had partnered with. Tell us a little bit about some of the people that you picked and why you chose them to talk about servant leadership.
Yeah, so I take some quiet time every morning. And in one of those moments of quiet, I literally got this thought of the title of the book, Selling with a Servant Heart. And I very seldom pause that time, but I wrote that down. And later on that morning, I asked Paula, my wife, I said, what do you think of this? And then within a couple of days, ran it by some other people, mentors and friends, and said, what do you think? And got some good positive feedback. Because I think there is a belief among a lot of people that a lot of what we've trained salespeople to do is, manipulative or not even really work anymore. If it ever worked, I'm certain it doesn't work really today.
Mm.
And so this whole idea of so then I thought, okay, I know some people who sell that way. And I started to make some lists of those. And I also reached out to a whole bunch of friends of mine and said, who do you know? And that was so cool, because I ended up meeting people, the guy in the mortgage business. So an average mortgage broker sells like, 6 mortgages helps 6 families close on mortgages a week. Jeff does 60. I'm sorry, the average will do 6 to 8 a month. Jeff does 60 a month. This guy, Dave Wall, who sells these expensive motor coaches. Dave Wall does more volume, probably than 90% of the RV dealerships in America as one person. And he's got a 60% repeat business and a 30% referral. His customers love him. In fact, the guy who told me about him was a customer of mine who was a tough buyer, and he raves and raves about this guy. And I just keep being reminded that I'm supposed to be doing this podcast with you. I apologize for the beep, but so he's got so those are the kinds of people I got to meet. And what I was trying to do was to say, are the things that I learned from watching great media salespeople, especially the last 30 years with the training business, is that consistent among great salespeople in other industries? So we did over 35 industries. I think we have 20 plus industries, 35 interviews, 20 plus industries represented. And out of that, I distilled what I thought were 10 lessons that those people taught us that were on the path to increasing more income, but also finding greater joy. You say, what's the mission for me in this book is I watch so many salespeople who leave our business because they don't fall in love with it. Maybe for all kinds of reasons. But when you realize that the blessing of this business is we have the ability to make a difference for our customers and their businesses, and that in doing that, we by serving them, we have this opportunity to grow ourselves both financially and in satisfaction, then this business becomes so much fun, so much more fun.
That idea of making a difference in the lives, it's more than them just being a customer of us or them, buying our spots and dots, but instead it's about investing in what's important in them, in their life, and what's important to them and their families. That really is, I think, one of the most rewarding things in our business. And those of us like you and I who have been doing this for 20 plus years, 30 plus years, 40 plus years, if you don't understand that, then it's just a job. It's just a career rather than what you really feel is a mission.
One of the interesting things, though, Mitch, in the interviews that came out was how for a lot of the people who would today be described as servant heart sellers, this was not their default. In other words, this isn't how they started in sales. And I actually think that was probably true for me as well. I was so driven when I was new in sales to be the achiever, to be recognized as being successful, that I think that was more important to me in the first decade of my career for sure, maybe longer. That was more important to me than almost anything else. In this last decade, I think the impact that I can have on a customer is more important than anything else. Now, it turned out that also led to more income and greater satisfaction, but I don't think it was my natural default situation. And a lot of people mentioned that was not the way they felt they were wired in the beginning. Rory Baden, one of the guys we interviewed, said I was taught that the customer had my money and I couldn't leave until I got my money. And so it became very, that kind of close early and close often, and all the stuff that all of us have learned. And
a movie that's not held up well, Glengarry Glen Ross, you reference
steak
it.
knives.
You ABC, always be closing. The steak knives, yes, exactly. And we now in the industry kind of joke about that, but really that was the mindset in the 70s and 80s and even early 90s about how our approach to sales.
I think it's longer than that. I think that there is still an emphasis more on the presentation and the close than there is on the questioning and the diagnosis. One of the chapters, one of the lessons in the book is a lesson called "Ask a Million Questions," and it came out of a conversation that I had with a mentor, spiritual coach friend of mine. He has a way of asking me these questions that I can never answer. They're like, what do you think the next chapter of your life is going to be like? And I don't have a clue. But that one day he asked me, he said, why do you think you've been successful? And I said, I think the biggest reason is that I've asked a million questions.
Mm.
That we tend to think about selling as talking. And what the servant heart sellers would tell you is it's about listening. It's about acute listening. It's about listening as if you walked into a crowded room, you could hear a pin drop. Roy Vaden said that to me in one of the interviews. Acute listening. That was one of my big takeaways from doing the interviews was that term acute listening. Not listening with the other question in mind, not listening, thinking, how am I going to respond to this? Just listening.
That is, that is one of the greatest takeaways, but you actually have been teaching that long before you wrote this book. I mean, these are some of the principles that you've instilled over the years. And you had mentioned, or in one of the seminars that I have taken that you had written, because you had written tons of curriculum and you could take these online courses and it was a nice teaser for those who weren't doing the whole program to actually get the chance to do it. And one of the advices was, I think you had said, go take an improv class because of the principles that improv taught. And by the way, I did that. I went into improv and I trained for 4 years in improv because yes and can be applied to our business. Right. It's yes, and then adding something positive to the conversation. But the most important part was listening. Right. Listening.
But listening has a partner, and that's what I think most salespeople forget. The partner is great questions. Mm-hmm. See, I can think as a salesperson. If you said to me, "What do I see as more salespeople doing?" is they think that they're asking questions, but their questions become, how's your business? How's the market? What are you doing for advertising? In other words, they're questions that so they can go back and say, oh yeah, I asked them a few questions, but they go right to their agenda and not long enough in really trying to figure out what the agenda is of the customer. So acute listening has a partner, which is great questions. And we can't ever forget that piece of it.
And by the way, having a lot of questions, I think intimidates some of my sellers. And I go, guys, you don't have to ask every single question on the list, but you should have those with you to reference because sometimes, and by the way, we always say, okay, we've got 30 minutes. Is that still good for you? I always tell them, check your watch, let them know, hey, just want to check in with you. We're having a great conversation. A lot of times those decision makers will give up that time because if they think that you're invested, then they'll keep telling you about their business.
My feeling today is that a business owner has no time to tell you the stuff that you can find out online before you walk in. Exactly. But they have all the time in the world for a well thought out business conversation.
Yes.
So, if you're going in, I taught all these questions years ago, probably in the session that you met, that salespeople better know before they walk in today. How long have you had your business? How many locations you have? Well, I don't have any time to teach you that stuff. You better know that before you come in. That's the minimum price of admission.
You and your actual quote was, "Don't ask a question you can't get from their website."
Exactly. Yeah, well, I can sometimes do that because there's a way to ask a question where I say, I was looking at your website and I noticed this, because that really says that you've done some homework and some research, and that builds trust. And trust is a real important piece of the sales process.
And another thing that you always taught, and I promise we're going to get to the meat of the books, but we're kind of talking about
We're
it
talking
now.
about some of the book, yeah.
So, but one of the things that you always used to say is that double click, and that was a fairly new term. And that double clicking is, you hear it's like something online, you're intrigued by it, so you double click to find out more. You ask this follow-up question
Right.
to something they're saying. Like if, for example, they go, "Well, I tried advertising, it didn't work." Well, that's interesting because,
Yeah.
so many people have been successful by using a marketing strategy, and then you would ask a question like, "Tell me what you did before and how did you measure the success?"
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, what you'll find if you keep asking that question is they talk themselves out of that objection, because they'll say at some point, "Well, we probably didn't do it correctly, or we didn't give it long enough commitment to it." So it's interesting. So one of the cool things in the book that I love anyway is I have a friend who produced. It was like a 60 minutes kind of interview show, and it wasn't 60 minutes, but he was a producer, and he said, when we got the most compelling sound, the most honest response was when we didn't respond to the answer immediately with another question, but we allowed silence. So you ask a question, customer answers the question. Rather than respond immediately, try to let a few seconds go by, because nature abhors a vacuum and people sometimes continue to talk. And when they continue to talk, that's when you'll get your most honest sound. And I think that's a great way to practice acute listening, which is not feel like I've got to rush right back in with the next question.
So I do want to kind of divert and talk a little bit about the book, some of those 10 lessons. One of the most profound for me, and I've had these conversations with my stations, with my GMs, my general sales managers, is when the customer is not always right. And that was music to my ears, because that's not what we always heard. Right. It was the customer is always right. And having to have some difficult conversations. And you actually, and I wrote this down as I was doing my research, is sometimes you got to fire the customer.
Right.
And how you go about doing that.
I don't think we're ever as abrupt as saying that.
No.
But
knowing that that's what we're going to have to do, and how we approach that. Maybe it's not a fit. Maybe we're not meeting their expectations. Maybe they're taking up so much of our time that we can't really give the time to other advertisers. And in my experience, Jim, in doing that, a lot of times they come groveling back to us, go, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I was hurting or offending you."
No, and I think that I have a friend who says it differently. He says, when you want it for them more than they want it for them, that might be a time to say, is this going to be a long-term situation? I think, though, what the title of the chapter about the customer is not always right is the responsibility that servant heart sellers would feel to not take a piece of business that they did not believe in. So if I've got a client that wants to do something, even if in the short term that might, be a check mark on my budget achievement for the next quarter or the next month, but I think it's not in their best interest, then I feel like there's a moral responsibility to say that to them. And if I built a relationship of trust, by the way, that does not take a long time. If you ask great questions and you've done your homework before you come in, you'll build trust quickly. You see that every day, every week in the calls that you make. You can build trust very quickly. But once I built a responsibility to trust, I feel a responsibility to say to that customer, you could do that, but
The but,
here's what
there it
I
is.
think, would be the best situation for you, or here's why that may not be the right situation for you. I think customers want honest, they want honest feedback. Now, there's another lesson that goes with that though. One of the lesson that I probably didn't have any conception of until I did the interviews was called the responsibility of trust, which is if they trust you, then man, that's a pretty awesome responsibility, because there's a requirement now that you know what you're doing. There's a requirement that you offer advice that isn't just your opinion.
Mm.
I think as media people, because we consume so much media, sometimes I express my opinion as if it's fact. No, it's my opinion. I think a servant heart seller is going to try to back up a suggestion that a customer do it in a different way with a little bit more evidence-based than just my opinion.
Another thing I think it's important for sellers today, and this kind of goes back to always be learning, always be trying to know what's happening. And I jokingly call myself the digital futurist, because I try to look at what the next trends are so we know where to kind of focus our attention. I'm working on my trend seminar for 2022 now. How valuable and important is that in your perspective for sellers to be a valuable resource to their clients?
It is absolutely essential. I wrote in the book about a car dealer in Des Moines that I was going to do a seminar in Des Moines a number of years ago. And this guy, Stu Hansen, owned the biggest Dodge dealership in one of the second or third largest Dodge dealerships in America. And it was set up that I was going to have dinner with him. And I love to hang out with successful people. I love to hang out with smart people. So I was really excited about the dinner. And so we had a wonderful conversation at dinner where he disclosed that, he had first turned down an offer to sell the dealerships for more money than you and I can ever dream about. I mean, this was a mega operation, and he had made a family decision to do that. Subsequently, a few years later, he did sell them. But so this is a guy who was successful beyond all belief, at the end of his career. And where was he at 7:30 the next morning? He was in the front row of the session I was conducting, taking more notes than anybody in the room. Anybody in the room. Who's the first guy to come up to you afterwards, and say, hey, I need to have you clarify this, or would you explain this? Who's got a conference call set up within a week with one of his ad people because he wanted me to elaborate on a point that I had made in the session? And that to me describes every high achiever that I know, is they can't stop learning. Now, they can't stop learning because if you really want to make a difference, I better be prepared, and I better know what's going on, and I better listen to a seminar like your digital trends seminar, because I need to be able to discuss that in a meaningful way. So, it's you saw me get a little bit on my soapbox about that, because I just think, if you're not growing, you're going.
I completely agree. And one of the greatest compliments I get is someone who has come to a number of my seminars, because I'll come 3 times a year. They'll come back and they'll say, I learned something new, even since the last time you're here, or I put into practice something you told me I need to be investing in, and we did it, and what a difference it made. So you always want to be a valuable resource, and I think that extends that trust that you've been talking about, of the preparation that you do before you go on that call, building that trust in the meeting, but then also that follow through. And I think that's another thing that we struggle with, in sellers struggle with, is they get that sale and they've moved on, rather than really doing the follow through and the heavy lifting behind the scenes.
Were you talking to my sales manager when you made that comment? I love to sell so much that that to me was the joy. And I probably became a lot more successful when I had somebody else to handle the details. So, yeah.
Well, listen, and by the way, you gotta play to your strength. I mean, one of the strengths that I have is that I can kind of show big concept ideas, but then I do have a team that when I leave the market, they're taking it to the next steps and following through.
That's what I needed.
Oh, and I think another thing, and I know that when you would do consultative calls where you'd go on calls, really defining the roles on the call of who is going to do what. And I've always admired that about that philosophy, because Jim, you are so well respected, but there were times where you would allow others to kind of take the lead, and you kind of provided that 40,000 foot air cover. And that is a great humbling lesson for a lot of people, especially that with your experience, to be able to say, I don't always have to be the star here. Let's let some other people shine too.
But don't you think that I think servant heart sellers in general, we all have to learn. I've got to learn to reduce my ego, and I really walked away from this book project thinking, humility is a sales word. Humility is I don't know everything. Humility is I need to know more. Humility is listening as opposed to talking. How can I approach this relationship from less about Jim, less about the ego, and more about my customer and what they're trying to accomplish?
Mm. Oh, from your lips to God's ears, we all kind of need those reminders of it being less about us and more about what it is for our customers. And again, all goes back to that building trust. And as you know, we can spend a million ways to build trust. It only takes one thing to break it.
Sure.
And so it's a very delicate.
But
line.
I had a sales rep who said that one of the ways that he maintained trust when they made mistakes, because we make mistakes, is he didn't have anybody else ever call a customer if there was a problem, and he called them first before they found out about it. So he operated in a very proactive way. So it is possible to maintain trust even if you make mistakes. In fact, if you handle the mistake correctly, you can sometimes enhance the trust that the customer has with you.
I couldn't agree more. And I tell my team that bad news does not age well. So let's get out there in front of it.
Boy, that's a great line. Isn't that true? Yeah.
Yep. And so, and if it's going to be bad news, and listen, I've taken the bullet for some of my stations, even though I just inherited a station, and they go, oh, by the way, we got a big issue we got to deal with. I go, let me be on the call with you.
Yeah, and I think how you handle those situations can speak. Look, business owners and business leaders make mistakes in their business. They know people make mistakes. It's when we hide from them, or we fail to acknowledge them, or we deny the seriousness of it. I think what I've learned is that if you make the mistake seem like an even bigger deal, it sends the message to the customer that we really care about your business and what's going on here.
I wanted to go back to the title of the book. It is in these words: selling with a servant heart, lessons on the path to joy and increased revenue. It's not increased revenue path, the path to joy. I like how you say it's about the joy first. Oh, and then by the way, it can also lead to more money for you.
Well, I hope it's not more the way, because the first word of the book, don't ever forget, is the word selling. So I love to sell. It's just my belief, Mitch, that when I can really connect with this idea that I can make a difference, that we have the ability to make a difference for our customers, for their businesses, and by doing that, not only am I going to make a lot more money, and I will. The people that I interviewed for this book, I mean, some of them are some of the highest paid in their industries by far. But they also just have a tremendous sense of satisfaction. Lisa Brooks Morris, 4,500 real estate agents in Sarasota County and Manatee County down here in Florida. She's number 6. Did 80 million in volume last year, single. And so you guys who know the real estate business know she's a high performer. She said when she reoriented her business to be more about serving than selling, her satisfaction with what she did went sky high. And if her satisfaction with what she did goes sky high, is it likely she's going to continue to be successful for a long period of time?
Mm,
You know, it's that just the more you give, the more you get back. It's
yeah.
true. It's true in life. The more we serve, the more is given back to us.
So last year, you finally decided you wanted to step back a little bit. Jim Doyle and Associates, JDA, as we all kind of know it in the industry, it's
Right.
you know, you're up there with influencing people and the Bible in terms of
No,
doctrine.
I don't think so.
Well, I mean, maybe that's a big that's me saying that, and
Yeah.
I think it's because you've had such an incredible impact. And by the way, when you affect my wallet, boy, are endeared to me. But you really taught me some great things. What's next for JDA? I know Angelo Patasso, another dear friend of mine, someone who had hired me early in my career.
Yeah.
After I learned your sales skills, we worked together at Belo. So what's the next chapter for JDA? What does 2022 look like?
So Angela would be the better person to ask that than me, because I really have pulled away and sort of function as a board of director status. Um, she has done an amazing job of, I think, bringing our company more current and more relevant to what's going on today. And I am so excited about the people that she's brought into our company by her leadership. You know, I met her at an NAB conference 10, 12, 15 years ago, and she was at Belo at that time. And I stood up from the table and I said to the person I was with, that's the woman who should run our company someday. I had no idea that a decade later, she was going to work for a company that got sold actually to you guys, and there might be an opportunity to put that together. So just one of the great blessings of my life. I've had a life loaded with so many wonderful things that have happened, and that's one of the good ones. So
wow, that's amazing.
that,
Well, she has an incredible reputation in our business. She ran a sales organization at WFAA that was the place you wanted to work. That was the place that you wanted to say that read on your card was Channel A WFAA, and she's carried that from media group to media group. Her impact on Tribune was amazing, and is still felt today. I have quite a few of the Tribune stations that she helped shepherd.
Yeah, because you guys bought them all. So
that's right. That's right. And her fingerprints are all over those. So as we kind of end our time together today, there are so many great takeaways from this book. Give us your elevator pitch of why every seller should read this book, Jim.
I think you read this book if you have an instinct already to serve and want specific ideas to figure out a way to do that in a more tangible, more demonstrable way. You buy this book or read this book, steal it from your desk. If you're wondering if this is a career for you, and wondering if this is something that you can find joy in, and you might buy this book if you were at a plateau in your career and wanted to say, how can I take what I do to another level? My belief is that the way you'll do that is by serving more. I do a meditation every day that says everything I give is given, or often everything I give is given to me in return. You know, give away love, you get back more love. Give away, but the same thing is true on the opposite. If I give away pissiness and sarcasm, I get back pissiness and sarcasm. So this is a book about people who are givers at their heart, who really believe in serving, not just win-win. Win-win says I win and somebody else wins at the same time. But these people are focused on making the customer win, knowing that if it's good for the customer, they will win in the long run, big time.
Oh, that's great. So as we kind of end our time, and this has kind of been a staple of my podcast, is I have my final thoughts, if you will, and a couple of things that I've gleaned, and I do take copious notes when I have these conversations. And a couple I just like to, for those who rush through the whole thing but want to know what the takeaways were, here are a few. Focus is important to our business. Having a singular point of attack as we approach that business. That we build trust, but we also, more importantly, we make a difference in the lives of those that we work with. The importance in the diagnosis and the discovery portion of the conversation is to ask a million questions. And I think you have taught that very well. Acute listening, as we were talking about the importance of listening to those. People will tell you what you want to know if you're willing to listen to them and listening acutely. Listening has a partner. I love this. Listening has a partner, and it's good questions. Going back to those having a million questions. And then another thing that you had said about sometimes when you have to have a difficult conversation with someone that that you're not going to work with in the future, and that is if you want it for them more than they want it for themselves. And so they have to be willing to work at it as hard as you're working at it as well. Before we end, Jim, any final thoughts from you about our conversation?
You captured everything so perfectly. No, I just, thank you for the privilege of doing this. It's just an absolute gift to get to hang out with you, and you ask great questions. So what a blast. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jim. And we're going to be back after the first of the year on our next season. More great interviews and conversations will be coming your way. Until next time, Next Star Nation and all of the U.S. country, I'm Mitch West.